Okay, welcome everyone. We'll give everyone a second to settle in to our Zoom webinar. So today, thank you all for joining our webinar, Fostering Corporate Nonprofit Partnerships Through Community Spaces. I am so excited to have our guest speaker, Sally Morrow, here to share her insights. So thank you for making the time to join us right around lunchtime for many of us, and for Sally, early morning. So thank you all for joining today. For those of you, I think many of you are familiar with us, but we are Bridge Innovate. I am Mary Kim, a senior consultant, and we are a global network of business strategists, consultants, and designers that team up with you to spark distinctive design, courageous leadership, and agile change to transform your organization for growth and good. And today you are part of our Inspire series. We are trying to pull in amazing people that inspire us to share a little bit, a glimpse of what they do to help spark creativity and innovation in what they do. So we're excited to have Sally here. So let's jump more into about our guest speaker today. So a little bit about our speaker, Sally. Some of you may be familiar with her work in Chattanooga, but currently Sally Morrow is Community Spaces Specialist at Tides, located in San Francisco Bay Area. So I mentioned that it's early morning for her. Sally serves as part of the real estate team. She is utilizing her experience and skills to build on the organization's expertise on development and management of shared space and equity-driven nonprofit workspace. Some of you, like I mentioned, may be familiar with Sally's role as an urban designer at Chattanooga Design Studio, where she managed high-level public benefit urban design projects with emphasis on the importance of public realm in close partnership with private, nonprofit, and government organizations. So we are excited to hear more from Sally today on corporate partnerships for shared spaces. So without further ado, Sally, please take it away.
Okay, thank you so much, Mary, for that introduction. I'm really excited to see a few familiar faces here, so thanks for joining. It means a lot to have all of you here to share a bit about the work. So an introduction, a quick introduction to format. Throughout the presentation, I'll use a couple of chat questions. So I'll use these as sort of breaks in my chat with you. So feel free to use the chat function to share your response to these, or just reflect on them as I'm walking you through. The first one that I'll start with, as I get a little more personal, is encourage you to do that too. So what's your why? As Mary mentioned, I've been working in especially the nonprofit sector for the last few years, but have a passion for urban design and equitable access to public resources, public spaces. So that's a bit about my why, but feel free to share yours as well. To help you understand kind of the journey we'll be on today for our conversation. Like I said, I'll get a little personal, share a bit about my background. I'd like to talk you through what Tides is doing to respond to trends we're seeing in real estate, and a couple of the solutions we're working with, the tools we're working with, and really talk through why those are needed now, as well as sharing a bit about the strategy, the mindset we use for partnership. And then hopefully we'll have some time for Q&A and to share ideas together. Again, feel free to use the chat freely to share resources. Okay, though a few of you may know me, and Mary mentioned that I have a background in toward urban design, I wanted to share a couple of my North Stars, my guiding principles with y'all to get started. So my background's in architecture. That's where I started my career. And early on, I noticed that there's a really significant overrepresentation of white people in the field of architecture. Over 90% of architects are white. So I started to notice that and think about what that meant for city building. You know, that trend is matched and feels like urban planning as well. So when we think about who's shaping our cities, it might not be representative. It's not representative of the country overall. And that's led in in certain parts of our history to policies like redlining. On the right is a redlining map of Chattanooga, Tennessee. And that's a practice where the federal government, in coordination with real estate professionals and lending organizations, prevented people of color from accessing stable home loans. Definitely encourage you to read more about it if it's new to you. It's only been in the last few years that I've learned about it myself. But what that's done in time is mean that there's a significant gap in who's shaping this, both in terms of the wealth to do so, to own property, and then the professionals in those fields. So as we're going into this next section, I encourage you to think about what you're looking at to shape your own impact strategy, share tools, information you rely on, data you use to shape your own practices. So I'll go ahead and introduce Tides. We are based primarily in San Francisco, as Mary mentioned, but also have a presence in New York City. And we're committing to building shared prosperity by accelerating the pace of social change. We work with a really rich network of different organizations, so we are almost exclusively working in partnership. That means that we're consistently working with entities like individual donors, corporate foundations, social change leaders, all at the same time in different parts of the organization. We provide management services and consulting services and collaborative partnerships, all designed to scale impact for social change. On the real estate team, we're especially focused on the sort of nonprofit, corporate foundation, corporation part of this, which is toward the bottom, though those partnerships are always changing, always growing as well. A bit about the urgency for Tides work. I just wanted to share a couple of nerdy charts to start, to ground us. So as I mentioned, you know, the history of redlining has guided my personal work, but it's also part of a larger trend we see that Tides is responding to. So on the chart on the right, you'll see home ownership rates over time. This might be something that we're a little more familiar with. It's talked about a bit more. But I wanted to highlight that in the last 100 years, the gap between white home ownership and Black home ownership has actually not even decreased, it's slightly increased. So this is still a really urgent topic for us. But beyond residential real estate, it's also true for commercial real estate. In 2016, the wealthiest 1% of households owned 40% of the non-residential land as well. And kind of zoomed out, that means that 90% of households only own 18% of the non-commercial real estate. Oops, sorry for that. Related to that is the kind of increasing urbanization of the United States, more people moving into cities, kind of a pinch for space. Again, I think the residential side of this gets talked about, you know, with folks getting priced out of neighborhoods, but on the chart on the right, I want to highlight that commercial real estate and residential real estate trends are really linked in this sense. So in a lot of places since 2011, commercial real estate costs have doubled. When you think about a small business or a small nonprofit that's really focused on keeping the doors open, significant shifts like this can be really destabilizing for them. And I want to remind you that our communities, our nonprofits are on the front line of providing resources to our communities, of building relationships, of strengthening the places that we love. So it's critical that they have the support that they need in our eyes. So Tides is addressing this in part through our community spaces and nonprofit centers program on the real estate team. Our goal is to provide long-term financial stability to nonprofits by providing free or reduced access to really high quality, inspiring spaces built on principles of collaboration and connection. Our goal is to leave a legacy of affordability and to where we can to help build equity in other communities as well. There are two key components of this. One we call community spaces. So these are designed more as short-term use spaces. So nonprofits can come in, host a board meeting or a fundraising event to use an elegant, inspiring space that just might not make sense for them to have in their own office, or they might not have room for, but which can also often be very expensive to rent. So I've listed examples of a few projects that Tides has been involved with recently in each of these categories. Another are nonprofit centers. So where community spaces are meant for like temporary activation, nonprofit centers are really committed to shared office space. And they might have some event spaces and things too, but it's really about nonprofits coming together and having a longer term collaboration. Either of these could be developed by a nonprofit, by a corporation. I mean, I think in terms of ownership, there could be a wide range. We've worked with a few corporate partners, particularly on community spaces. Tides has. But then I also want to highlight too, we just recently and earlier this year added the Nonprofit Centers Network, which is designed to help connect those centers to one another and to share information, share lessons between them. Nonprofit centers are a growing trend, a growing field. So, you know, some areas are probably more densely populated with them than others, but there are 570 in North America that we know of. Beyond the sort of bigger equity case for these spaces, I also want to highlight that the people who use them are really enthusiastic about it. So these are responses for nonprofit centers specifically, but in addition to helping ensure that their rents are rising in a more gentle way by being in a mission-driven space, they also report that they can achieve their goals more effectively, right? That they're able to act on their mission more effectively by being part of this and having the operations, you know, being one less thing to think about. So just to highlight kind of what a community space versus a nonprofit center means, I wanted to walk you through two that Tides has worked with. The Google Community Space was created in 2017 in partnership with google.org. Tides operates the facility. Google.org is the owner. It's in their downtown campus. It's a great opportunity for the community to be invited in to a space that, you know, might not feel or be welcoming otherwise if you're not a Google employee. It's for temporary use. It's meetings, events, even co-working, and it's open to any 501c3 in the Bay Area that's mission aligned, as well as some government organizations. We do a little bit of vetting, but after that, it's free to use. It's always free to use. An example that Tides has taken the lead on, this happened in the 1990s here in San Francisco. Tides led the leasing, a master leasing for 150,000 square feet in a national park in San Francisco. We're able to use that space and sublease to 60 other tenants that are mission aligned. So these are kind of social enterprises and nonprofits. We rent the space at below market rates to help stabilize their work, their organizations, and you know, so that means the space is not subject to the same massive fluctuations that we saw early on. We also rent out our conference rooms and shared spaces, so at, again, below market rates, to help invite the public to participate in the space as well. And there are other examples of this. Green Lining 360 Center in Oakland, it has a similar operations. It's a nonprofit that owns their building and sublets. And also I want to highlight Floor 5 in Chattanooga is a good example of what we would call a community space. It's just open to the public. So for those of you familiar with Chattanooga, that's like, I think, a great type. Okay, So headed into this next section, I know that was a lot of information, but the goal is to talk about next steps and some of the high level strategy behind getting started as well. So I encourage you as we're going through this, if any of this content is new to you or challenging you in a new way, to think about what your next best step in this might be, what information you would like to gather, or what conversation you would like to have. Because ultimately, again, the goal is shared parity, right? It's to embrace that, to act within that. For any of our corporate entities here, I want to highlight how real estate decisions like this can be part of a larger corporate social responsibility strategy. This is a quickly growing field, as I'm sure a lot of you know, and 80% of investors are now saying that they're thinking about these things when they're making investment decisions. They're thinking about a company's social impact. And even more time sensitively, 9 in 10 Americans say that COVID, this moment, I mean, I would also add like Black Lives Matter, the movement for Black Lives Matter, our social conversation right now means that this is urgent. This is the right time to start. So as we're thinking about building corporate connections, corporate investments in spaces, I think this is an important thing to consider. But of course, on the strategy side, there's a lot to consider as well. So we encourage you to look at your mission, whether you're a nonprofit interested in starting a nonprofit center or a corporation who's interested in supporting your community. I mean, it's important to reflect on whether real estate is a skill you have now and if it's part of your existing strategy. If not, where it might fit in. This is a long-term commitment, of course. So another important thing to consider is real estate operations. This is where Tides often supports our partners, is in the operations of a community space, either helping shape strategy or actually managing the operations, because it's no joke. It's, to balance a lot of tenants. I'm sure plenty of you here are familiar with that. But especially to manage property, keeping an eye for equity and working within a mission aligned context, it can add some unique challenges. So if you are not already set up for that, what do you need? What are your missing pieces, either in terms of staff, funding, expertise to move that forward? And then, are you ready? Are you up to the task to try something new and different? I think risk is a part of this. I mean, this context, COVID, is a great example. I manage a community space that opened in February. We're at the very end of January. So we were just getting started as the context really changed for us. So there are some big unknowns, to be sure. And then I really want to highlight that this work for us is about building community. It's about building relationships. It's about working as a team to advance social equity. And so that really can't be done in isolation. It's the more of a team you have, the better. And so if this is something you're interested in reconsidering for yourself, for your organization, we encourage you to think about who your partners are, who your allies are, the folks you would want to see this succeed, or the folks you'd need on your team to help move it forward, to help you understand the demand in your city. There's a lot to consider, of course, as you move through that. All right. Okay, a lot of content, folks. Thanks so much. It's been really a joy to share a little bit about this work. I just want to encourage you to think about the really important ways that we can address the social challenges that we have right now by thinking more creatively about inclusion in space and in places. That's going to require a few things of us, crossing boundaries, embracing risk, and like I said, really being bold about taking part in change. So we have a little time for questions. I think that we have a few minutes. Here's my email address. Please email me with questions. That's the website as well, where you can learn a bit more about Tide's Collaborative Spaces program. And if I, for some reason, unable to answer a question, just know that I work with an amazing team. I will do my best to get you an answer by leaning on their expertise too. So,
Great.
thank you so much.
Sally, thank you. As she mentioned, it looks like we have a few minutes to ask questions, and I see that in the chat. I'll address a few comments to start off. We had a couple of our viewers saying they love your nerdy charts. So just kudos to you, Sally, for your charts. And yes, our session is being recorded, and for our registrants, the recording will be shared. And the question that I cannot answer is actually Kathleen. It looks like Lexi from our Tides team has answered the question in the chat. Are the nonprofit centers also temporary for users? And if you're interested in more information, there is that chat answer. And feel free to use the chat if you have a burning question. We have a couple of minutes. And if it's okay, I'd love to kick off by just, Sally, you were starting to mention about COVID and its impact on shared spaces. I'm curious to hear, oh, there you go, Jenny, we kind of have the same question here. What kind of impact are you expecting? What is kind of the future of shared spaces that you are starting to navigate and maybe impacting your strategy? I'd love to hear a bit more about that.
Yeah, I mean, it's challenging because this situation is so quickly evolving. We don't have like the solid answer either, right? We're learning alongside our partners. What has been really encouraging for me is to see that we have seen a lot of enthusiasm with other partners, folks operating space in the Bay Area who are eager to talk about this and problem solve together. So I think that will be a hidden benefit of this challenging time, right? Navigating this together, is that we might see even stronger relationships between spaces, either within the same region or across the country, as we actively problem solve. In terms of community spaces overall, while it might be tempting to say that, well, we all work remote, we're done with offices, and in some ways that will be true. We'll see shifts, I think. It's not realistic, right? There are community organizations on the ground every day that have real needs for space beyond just office work, but really connecting with community. I think it's true that in the short term, we will be thinking of innovative ways to use space, or have mask policies, and making sure that we're keeping people safe. And so in that way, operations is a bit different. But the underlying need for community spaces, for equitable, affordable office spaces for organizations that are typically destabilized by neighborhood change, that's not going to change. And I think it will actually grow. I think, this moment is highlighting inequity that's in place, and without solutions that really address those issues in a long-term way, I think we'll continue to see a lot of demand for spaces like this.
Great, thank you. Indirectly answer the next question. Do you think shared space will evolve to be both physical and digital?
Yeah, that's a great question. We're already seeing that with our partners, that we are getting creative about what it means to support a nonprofit and to grow community, even if that happens primarily in a digital context. So I'm seeing more emphasis on like intentional community building. Our partner organizations who operate community space being really thoughtful, including Tides. And I know that Lexi on my team has done a great job of really checking in with tenants and seeing where they are. But I think it also means what can we do more of through technology or other resources, other skills to support our nonprofit community in different ways than what we had planned. So yeah, I'm seeing a lot of like AV improvements for remote friendliness or hybrid in-person offsite meetings. I think we'll see a lot of changes like that.
Great. One other question I personally have is also, hold on, I want to read this before I share because we have limited time. Maybe this one's a better one. Suggestions on how to engage corporates in the strategy. Okay, I'm going to push this one because the other one I think I'm going to put in the chat, but I think many of us would like to hear this. How to engage corporates in this strategy?
Yeah, I see a two-part component here. So I think that the conversation can be led in some ways by the nonprofit community. So for instance, a lot of areas have community foundations or United Ways, entities that work with a lot of nonprofits. I do see opportunity for a bottom-up kind of approach like that, where a nonprofit could shape the concept for a center or community space and then seek corporate relationships. But I also see a lot of room for corporations to take the lead on this. So this is something that, you know, Tides is always happy to share more information with, and hopefully a presentation like this would plant the seed. But I think there's a lot of room for corporate leadership, even just asking the question of what your role could look like in this broader conversation. I think like from my point of view, like with any relationship, it happens slowly and with an open mind. So trying to start the conversation in any way, right? Like identifying a potential ally within the corporate giving component of a corporation, or if you are that person, really asking yourself who you need to talk with to move this forward. But I think it's baby steps and open conversation. Tides and NCN are always here to answer questions. So if that is on your mind, we love talking about this. Love sharing information. So.
Great. Sally, so this is going to be our closing question. We're almost at noon. Can you share case studies or resources that highlight why corporate partnerships and engagement is valuable to the community and the company's bottom line?
Yeah, so that's not something that I have right at my fingertips, but I would love to work with my team members, and see what resources we already have on hand. Yeah, that's great. Thanks for asking that question. I think that's really important that we can be specific as we advocate for this kind of work. So thank you for asking that.
Yeah, and I think that's something Bridge can help in a follow-up. As I mentioned, we'll share a recording. We may be able to, if Sally, if your team's able to put together some resources or reading materials for our registrants, we would be happy to share that with you. Okay. And there are some additional questions. I do want to be mindful of our participants. So we'll quickly wrap up. And if anyone, Sally, if you're open to that, we can try to stick around for a couple more minutes to answer. There are, many of us are more interested in hearing from you. So I would say if you are interested in any more Inspire series events, we have many more of them coming up this week that's focused on community vibrancy and women leadership coming up. So please visit bridgeinnovate.com, and in the events tab, you'll see many more events that you can participate in. And for those of you that have to leave, thank you so much for joining us today. And if you have an extra couple more minutes, and if you have a burning question you'd like Sally to answer right away, we'll see if we can spend a couple more minutes with you all and answer those burning questions. And thank you for joining today. Okay.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Yes. Thank you, everyone. Okay, so for those of you, feel free to leave if you're able to stick around, stick around. So Sally, if you don't mind, do you mind answering a couple more questions for our audience?
Let's do it.
All right. So we have a question from Clinton. Second line, of key slide 9 in 10 American doing right by stakeholders? Does it apply to corporate social responsibility officers? Are they embracing it?
Yeah, let's see. I think I can go
Yeah,
back
back to that slide.
so I can share that. I think, yeah, I believe this is the slide that's being referenced. Sorry, could you repeat? Is the question is whether that quote applies to corporate social responsibility officers?
Yes, and are they embracing it?
Well,
What are your thoughts?
yeah, so I think there is a lot of active conversation that I've heard about opportunity that corporations see. I mean, for instance, Google extended access to their technology, knowing that folks are working remotely more and may or may not have the resources um, to pay for a subscription. So they've expanded access. I've seen other examples like that where folks are waiving fees, thinking differently, which tells me that yes, CSR folks are really being proactive and taking that feeling to heart, are acting quickly in ways that they can. So Tides being in the philanthropy space, there's been a lot of responsive grant making as well. And so, yeah, I see that from the foundation side, but can also, I'm seeing a lot of action, a lot of momentum on corporate's part to take this to heart.
Great. Right. So one more comment, and I think we're ready to wrap up. Mary's comment is that maybe an answer is in the problem. Corporate goes to remote workers and now have touch space, adapt spaces to community needs, have too much, not touch. So that was from Mary joining. And, oh, okay, typo. Mary says there's a typo. Okay. So corporate goes to remote workers and now have touch space. So any comments there, Sally? What's your thoughts?
I'd love to hear. So touch space is a phrase that's new to me. Does that mean digital?
Oh,
Like,
how too much space, not touch
yeah,
space. It's what
there we
I
go.
think we're okay. Mary,
Yeah,
thank you so much for the clarification. I think
that's
that
perfect.
explains a lot.
That's great. Yeah, I think so. Back to the challenge opportunity. Yeah, no, that's a great point. Some companies are already making decisions about how to change their physical space. Part of what I'm seeing, though, or reading, is that we are at a place now where we recognize we might need more space per person. So offices over the last 15 years or so especially had been giving less and less and less space per person. Open offices allow us to get a lot more people in the same footprint. And we might need to unravel that a bit to give individuals more space as they're in the workplace. So it's possible that even offices might not have as much extra space as it might seem. However, I think a model like this is a great opportunity if you do find that you have extra space, that part of your workforce has gone fully remote and you just know that you won't need that space, but you're in a long-term lease. I think this is a great way to consider how even by subleasing parts of your space to other organizations, you could prioritize nonprofits, you could prioritize stabilized rents for organizations, while also making sure that you're occupying your space. So I agree. It is both a challenge and an opportunity. I do feel like it's a little early, personally, to say that companies, corporations will have too much space, because a lot of folks are eager still to get back to the office when they can, when it's safe to do so.
Yeah. What are your thoughts in terms of shared space? And like you mentioned, we do see a greater trend of those spaces being available. Like you said, over 500. Of course, there could be more. But in terms of for your, maybe with your design background, architecture background, is there a design criteria that's being applied to these new shared spaces that to really truly inspire users? Like what do you look for in a space?
Oh, that's a great question. One thing that I've seen is a real anchor in community spaces, whether they're short-term or long-term use, is a place where people are coming together. So at Tides, we have a place called the Tides Pool, and it's open to use both by the Tides staff, the 100 folks we have in the building, as well as all our tenants. And it's great to see how people really do just go there to, pop open their computer and work for a few minutes. But similarly at community spaces and short-term use places, I just see that people really gravitate toward that, toward a welcoming kind of living room, like a social space. It feels, I see that organizations who are eager to participate in a space like this are also really excited about collaboration and connection, building new relationships with other tenants. And so I think that, really doubling down on what that space is, what is the kind of common ground place. I think that's the most exciting from a design standpoint, the most important place to focus. And my background's in urban design, so I'm all about that. Creating places to help people connect, public feeling spaces.
Great. Well, Sally, thank you so much. We've spent extra 8 minutes, and I'm so glad that we were able to cover some of these questions. Thank you so much for your time, for being a guest speaker in the Inspire series, and for a couple of us who were able to join in for the very last minutes. Thank you, everyone. And we'll wrap up our webinar right now. Thank you all. Have a great rest of the day.
Thank you.